On behalf of the government of the student body and the lectures committee, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon to this lecture by Father Darrell Rupiper on unofficial diplomacy, Tehran, hostages, and U.S. policy. Father Rupiper, as you may have read, has been to Tehran twice, once in February and once at Easter as part of the clergy delegations that have visited Tehran and the hostages. I believe that this will be a very constructive lecture, and we have asked various Iranian student associations to provide us with a response, and they will do so at the end of Father Rupiper's address. I will monitor the timing of this so we can try to get as much done as possible before everybody needs to go home for dinner. The address of Father Rupiper will be followed by a very short period of 4 or 5 questions from the audience, and then we will have the Iranian Student Association and the Muslim Student Society providing a joint statement, and that will be followed by the Muslim Student Association providing another statement, and then we will have more questions from the audience. So on behalf of the Lectures Committee, I'd like you to welcome Father Rupiper.
First of all, I'm very happy that the Iranian students will be because certainly I'm not an expert on the whole situation, and I'm very open to learning more about it. I think that some of the things that I'm going to say will probably upset some of the American people. My report or my talk will be quite biased in favor of the Iranians, and I think that we can stand this after having heard the other side for something like 25 years. That's my impression anyway. These 6 months have been a time of frustration. They have been a time of anger, empathy, the whole gamut of emotions for the American people. But I do think it has really been a time of learning for us. And I think primarily due to the fact that we have not had a rational approach to some kind of national debate dealing with the whole crisis in Iran and in the United States. Focus has been primarily on the embassy and on the number of hostages and also on the well-being of the hostages. And I think it would be well for us to spend a little time putting that crisis in historical context so that we might be able to understand a little bit more the Iranian side of the whole. Unless this is done, I don't much chance of reconciliation between our two governments and therefore between our two nations. So I would just like to quickly outline developments that have given birth to what we consider a desperate act, a violation of international law, that is, the taking of the embassy and the holding of hostages for 6 months. In 1953, the Shah turned to Iran due to the fact that the Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalized the oil. This set the and certain power structures in the United States into action, and Allen Dulles in 1953 personally, head of the CIA, escorted the Shah to the Peacock throne. He had been in exile in Rome. By 1956, the CIA had helped to set up the SAVAK and helped train the SAVAK in torture techniques. This came out, a 50-minute program It must be about a couple months ago. And I don't think there's any longer much doubt in the United States that the CIA was very much involved in the instruction and setting up of SAVAK. As early as 1960, Hubert Humphrey was quoting the head of the Army as saying, "Thanks to United States military aid, we can now control the civilian population of Iran." And I think it would be very good for us as Americans, whose country has been very powerful, especially since 1945, to think what it might be like for another country to come into our country and remove President Carter, our duly elected official. I see some smiles. And replace him with someone of their own choosing. I think it would be good for us to reflect on how we would feel if that government, that foreign government, would choose some Americans to teach them how to torture Americans. The kind of thing that was really going on. It's, as I say, if there's going to be any kind of understanding or future reconciliation, then we have to take these things into consideration. In 1983, there were huge demonstrations in Iran. This was triggered by the unveiling of policies drawn up in the United States for reform in the area of industry and agriculture for Iran. These policies were personally handed by Vice President Lyndon Johnson to the Shah. And when the people heard about it, and under the inspiration and leadership of Khomeini, the people in the streets, and an estimated 15,000 people were mowed down. What is our reaction to this day about 4 or 5 students at Kent State being killed? This is 15,000 people. As early as 1974, Amnesty International was saying that Iran is the worst violator of human rights in the world. In their 1970 report, they say this: torture was used systematically and on a large scale. The methods most frequently used included electric shocks, burning with cigarettes and candles, extended sleep deprivation, toasting people on a hot metal grill, sexual abuses of various kinds, including the insertion of bottles and hot eggs into the anus. The International Red Cross visited some of the prisons of Iran, sent a top-secret document to the Shah saying that they estimate that as many as 80 to 90% of the political prisoners are tortured. When the Shah was questioned about political rights, he said that there were only perhaps 3,000 political prisoners in Iran, when foreign sources were saying as many as 100,000. The Shah was denying the fact that torture existed, and our own government, our own administrations were certainly playing down the fact. As late as 1976, the Shah said, "No one even talks about Khomeini. No one even mentions his name except perhaps some communist terrorists." In 1978, President Carter saw fit to spend New Year's Eve with the Shah in Tehran. And that is when he made his much publicized toast saying, "Iran, under the great leadership of the Shah, is an island of stability in one of the most troubled areas of the world. This is a great tribute to you, Your Majesty, and to your leadership, and to the respect, the admiration, and the love which your people give to you." The summer of '78, the CIA reported to Carter that Iran, quote, "is not a revolutionary or even a pre-revolutionary situation. Those who are in opposition, both violent and nonviolent, do not have the capacity to be more than troublesome." September 8th, large demonstrations throughout Iran, 6,000 people killed. Immediately after that demonstration and that slaughter, President Carter phoned the Shah, informing him that the administration was fully behind the Shah. And in November, shortly after that, an emergency shipment of anti-riot gear was sent to Iran. In January of '79, the Shah informs his people that under doctor's advice, he's going on vacation to rest, and that he promised that he would return. Within a month, some 23 million Iranians out of a total of population of 35 to 36 million took to the streets, and they toppled the Shah's regime. They, in fact, took their country back. And this wasn't the first time. There were 7 or 8 times in the last 100 years that there were national uprisings against dictatorship rule. 7 or 8 times they won the battle, but lost the war. And the Iranian people are still very suspicious, or suspect very strongly, that the United States still has intentions on Iran. And this is why communiques from the embassy and from Iran, the diplomats to Carter, were saying that if the Shah is allowed back into the States, that they could not foresee the consequences, but certainly the embassy would be in extreme danger. Bruce Langan, charge d'affaires in Tehran, sent a telegram, or however they communicate, in July. He was asked to make an evaluation again in August, and documents found in the embassy saying that which say that he said the same thing. The embassy would be in extreme danger. There were no reinforcements sent to the embassy. The Shah was admitted, and I think it was a very political decision on the part of Kissinger, Rockefeller, Trilateral Commission, etc., to have the Shah come back, and we would see what happens over there. And subsequently, I think all of their plans have functioned quite well, in as much as lots of things have happened in the States which they were hoping to do. Like what? Mobilizing the United States citizens, a solidarity, a unity that hasn't been experienced for a long time, even if it's hatred that is the unifying force against Iran. The draft is going to be reinstated. We have remilitarized or sent all kinds of equipment into the Persian Gulf area. The Pentagon has paraded out all its programs from behind the curtain, and the people have been accepting. And the budget has gone up, and social programs cut down. The CIA has been given carte blanche on its operations since that time. They have they think that they have eliminated what is called the Vietnam syndrome. That is the unwillingness of the American people to send their young people into a war similar to Vietnam. That remains to be seen. But all these things, I think, entered into the very political decision to allow the Shah to come back, and that's how I read it anyway. How did I get involved in this? Or maybe you're not interested, I don't know. During the 1970s, I was working in behalf of human rights through Amnesty International. There was a committee of people in Lawrence, Kansas that were also working in behalf of human rights in Iran through the 70s. And they sent a delegation there in the 70s to investigate, for example, the disappearance of 18 literary persons. At that time, they met with Bonnie Sauter and a few other people who were not yet officially elected representatives of their country. When the embassy was taken, they called themselves the Committee for American-Iranian Crisis Resolution. The purpose of the committee is to establish people-to-people dialogue between the United States and Iran, people-to-people diplomacy with a view or a goal toward reconciliation between our peoples and our governments. This committee was responsible for a trip in December, and then they also arranged for the clergy to celebrate Christmas services for the hostages. They arranged for a delegation of 50 persons at the invitation of the students holding the hostages in February to go over, of which I was a member. They also arranged for the Easter visit of clergymen from this country. There were 3 of us. So that's the committee. And this weekend, there are plans that the head of our committee, plus a couple of people from hostage families, go to Iran and visit their ban on travel. To Iran happens when they get on the government of Iran.